Welcome back. So glad to be here. So we have a very special guest with everyone today. This is Tim Roye joining the show. He's worked for the Golden State Warriors for a long time as their radio broadcaster. He's witnessed them win 4 NBA championships, and I was doing my research. He won the 2022 California Sportscaster of the Year, so some pretty cool accolades, and he's the brother of our very own Coach Roy. So thanks for coming on. Glad to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be on with you, Drew. I've heard a lot about you over the years, and it's great. But who's that other guy in the picture? I
Don't be
can't believe I
jealous
can't
just
believe I'm
because,
related
I
to
got
him.
the
See?
looks.
Yeah, yeah. I got the hair.
Yeah.
So
So, Tim, listen, I know it's off season, but people don't understand how busy that can be in your business. And I know you've had a lot of family events going on, Gabby getting married, my niece, and all those kinds of things going on. So really, we want to thank you for making some time to join us today. We really appreciate it.
yeah, no problem.
Um,
It's
we,
interesting. The off season, everybody thinks you don't work, but actually you do work in the off season because
yeah.
I got to watch the game, the finals I'm prepping right now on guys who are coming in the league via the draft. So yeah, there is still work to do, and I've got a couple summer league games lined up. So there's a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do coming up. Drew, why don't you get us rolling there, bud?
Yeah, so I got quite a few questions for you.
Sure.
So one of the things I wanted to ask was just about the evolution of the game. Clearly, the game has evolved a lot in the last, 30 years or so, plus since you came into the league. And I was just curious if your play-by-play has had to evolve with the league, or if you just kind of go with the same approach and it just naturally works with a different style of play now.
The preparation is the same. You still prep for everything. I prep every game like it's going to be a blowout, and because you never know what's going to happen. And the second thing is the only thing that's changed is that teams are playing faster. And so you have to stay with the play a lot more than maybe when it used to be you hear the organ music and there's a New York Knick bashing a Miami Heat player for a position and just a war down the post. Those days are gone, hopefully for good. I think the skill level is at its all-time highest right now in terms of so many players who can shoot, so many players who can handle, and so I think the only difference for me is that the game's a little faster, and you have to stay on top of the play.
You're somebody who grew up on the East Coast in Connecticut, and now you've been on the West Coast for quite some time now, for decades. I just wanted you to give us a little bit of perspective on the difference between East Coast and West Coast, both in like culture and people in the cities, as well as the game of basketball and how the basketball culture and the interest in basketball differs from, Connecticut to California.
Well, I think the difference, in terms of the culture is the New England culture is just so rich in history and tradition. It's really the first place that this country started to evolve from, and out here where I am in California, there's a lot of Mexican history. There's a town nearby called Vallejo that's named after General Vallejo, who basically ran California for a few decades, and so they have that kind of history. So it's a little bit different. The culture is a little bit different in the sense where here in the West we get so much good weather. I think people are outdoors a lot. There's a million things to do. You can hike, you can fish, you can camp, you can go kayaking, you can go to the ocean, just hang out at the beach. You can go to Tahoe and ski in the winter. So it's really an outdoors culture here. As far as the basketball goes, basketball has evolved now so where everybody plays basketball in every part of the country. And so I think the culture here in the Bay Area is truly rich. Oakland is where Bill Russell grew up. University of San Francisco is where he went to college. Paul Silas was a high school teammate of Bill Russell. The point guards have come out of the East Bay. Jason Kidd, Gary Payton, Damian Lillard. It just goes on and on and on. There's a really rich basketball tradition here. When Pat and I were growing up in Connecticut, I think it was one of the glory eras of Connecticut basketball. So many players were produced to college and to the NBA. You don't see that as much anymore, partially because they're going to different prep schools and different, AAU camps and colleges than what they used to. And I think also, too, I think the basketball suffered a little bit in the Northeast when the Big East was no longer the Big East. Now it's everybody's. It's football is driving the college game. But out here, the one of the cool things about being a Warrior announcer is they know the game. They love the game. The game's been here since 1963, and Warrior fans have a deep culture and a deep knowledge of the NBA. I don't have to tell them, who some of the different players are in the NBA. They know. They know when it's time to, start chanting defense. They don't need a scoreboard to tell them that.
That's fantastic. I think that's you really hit the nail on the head there with Golden State. They really understand the basketball culture. I think Boston's awesome as well in their own right. Obviously, elephant in the room, giant run of success from 2015 to 2022 with the Warriors. They were able to win 4 championships and make it to 6 finals. I got to ask you, that dominant success, how was that able to happen? How did they build that?
Well, they built it because they took a chance on a skinny kid from Charlotte, North Carolina, named Steph Curry, and I remember I had to interview Don Nelson right after we made the pick. So I'm in a hallway. He comes out of the war room and he looks at me and he said, "We just got the best passer in the draft." And I'm thinking, wait a minute, he's the best shooter in the draft. He's also the best passer. So, so that gave you an idea of how high they held him, and there was a rumor going around that the Warriors were going to move Curry to Phoenix in a trade that involved Amari Stoudemire. But that was, I think, predicated on the fact that Curry wasn't going to be on the board, because once they got Curry, they made sure they told everybody, we're not trading him. And Curry did not want to go to Golden State. The Warriors were not the Warriors then. We were sort of an outpost, a Siberian outpost in the NBA. We'd only been to the playoffs once in about 20 years, and so he didn't even come work out for the Warriors. But that's how high they held him in regard. A guy named Larry Riley, who was the general manager then, said, "No, I got our guy. I got the guy I wanted." And so that's where it started. And then you add Klay Thompson a couple years later. Best pure shooting form I've ever seen on a player. And when the Warriors really changed in 2012, when the sale was made, and Peter Lacob, who had been, Peter Guber and Joe Lacob. Joe Lacob had been a minority owner with the Celtics and had wanted to become his own guy, and bought the Warriors and said from day one, we're going to get banners. We're not waiting to get banners. And after that, everything changed. Everything was about winning. And they made moves. They hired the right coach in Steve Kerr in 2014. They made a trade that was really unpopular here, trading Monte Ellis for an injured Andrew Bogut. Bogut was a perfect piece for them at center, and they continued to add all these little pieces. Leandro Barbosa, Sean Livingston, Andre Iguodala. They made this crazy. Bob Myers was general manager. They made a crazy 4-team trade for Andre Iguodala. If you go to Basketball Reference and look at that, how he pulled that off is amazing. There were so many moving parts there. And then they had this winning culture. Steph Curry wanted to win. Steve Kerr wanted to win. Our ownership wanted to win. And, if you think about it, what's crazy about the run is that they went to the finals 5 straight years. The last team that did that, the Celtics in the 1960s. That to me is as much as the titles. That to me it shows you just how good they were. And of course, the other thing that happened after they lost in 2016 was they knew Kevin Durant was looking, and they had their roster set up so they could make moves in a hurry if they got Durant. And so they had to trade Bogut, they had to move on from Harrison Barnes, and they had deals ready. So as soon as KD said yes, the Warriors were ready and made that move.
Tim, you mentioned how Curry was the start of the whole thing, and of course he's received so much attention over the years, well deserved. And you've gotten to know him. Have you ever stopped and went, wow, how lucky am I? I've called every 3-point shot this guy has made in his career.
Yeah.
I mean, do you ever look at it and think I know you've been in places where they have not been successful. When you were in Sacramento, when you were in Phoenix, they went through a rough time. Your first few years with the Warriors, it was kind of a disaster over there.
First few years, it was 95 to 2006. We hadn't even gotten to 500. First few years. My overall record, by the way, is still below 500.
Okay.
Seriously.
But do you ever sometimes just stop and go, wow, how did this kid from Windsor, Connecticut get to call Steph Curry's games for his whole career?
Well, Drew, I'll tell you this. I'll tell Drew the story this way. When I was a freshman in high school, and I was probably the worst high school basketball player in the state of Connecticut. And then the only reason I think they didn't cut me was because Pat was starting point guard for the varsity. So Pat drugged me to camp after camp after camp, and by my senior year, I was off the bench and got into just about every game. And so, but the thing that if you had told that kid that freshman year, hey, you're going to spend your life, most of your life working in the NBA, I would have said, yeah, right, that's going to happen for me. But again, it's just, I think like a lot of players in the league, I think a lot of the announcers are hardworking guys that basically, did their time in small markets and things to get to where they are. And I'm a great example of that. That if you keep pressing, keep working hard and be a good guy. I think that's part of it. Nobody wants to work with a jerk. So if you're a nice guy, people will want to work with you all the time.
You've worked with multiple partners over the years and done games by yourself. Maybe you could talk a little bit about adapting to who your color man is, or whether you prefer being solo.
I think in the NBA you can do it solo because there's so little time for a radio analyst. The radio analyst, if they're good, will have to pick their spots and get in and get out so that they don't interrupt play. My joke a few years back was that I was doing road games with Jim Barnett, a former first-round draft pick of the Boston Celtics, and then Tom Tolbert, who played for the Warriors and went to the Final Four with University of Arizona. He is my color guy at home, and so my joke was that on the road, all my references were to the 1960s for Jim, and at home, all my references were the 1980s for Tolbert. So I had to have two sets of ways of describing things, and so you just learn and adapt. But both of those guys are guys that reached the top of their profession basketball wise, but also they were the top of their profession on the air. They both were excellent commentators. And sometimes in Sacramento, I had a chance to work with a guy named Derek Dickey, who played on the Warriors championship team, played on the Bulls with Michael Jordan, and he was a delight to work with as well. So you just learn to adapt and to try to balance, your profession with their profession.
So you were discussing the 2016 loss in the finals to the Cavaliers after the 73-9 season. Then you go out, you get Kevin Durant during that offseason. That 2017 Warriors team, is that the greatest NBA team of all time?
I think it's got to be right there. I think it's hard to say, are they better than the Celtics in the 60s who produced all those Hall of Famers? You don't know, but they to me, they're in the discussion. There is a moment that year in training camp where we were down at the University of University of California, San Diego, down in La Jolla, beautiful spot. And we're ending practice. I'm getting up I was working on the computer, get up. I'm going to go over and hear what Steve Kerr had to say about practice after watching it. And then he's over there talking with Jerry West, the logo, right? One of the greatest players of all time. And I'm in front of me is, Klay Thompson at one end, Steph Curry at the other end, two of the best shooters, maybe the best shooting backcourt of all time, I think it is. And they're getting up their extra shots, which they do after every practice. And then I peek over my shoulder, I look back, and Kevin Durant's over there. And Steve Nash, a two-time MVP, is working with Kevin Durant on how to be more efficient curling off a screen. And I've kind of took a step back, but where have I gone? What reality is this? What universe am I in? And that's what it was. It was like traveling with rock stars those 3 years. It was incredible.
That sounds super, super awesome. I'm kind of jealous of that, to be honest. Now we're at a point in the NBA where we've had a lot of great coaches and great guards. Where do you put Steph and Steve Kerr, like in terms of all time? Probably maybe one of the best point guard coach duos of all time, if not the best. And then I think Steph's probably the greatest point guard, and I think Steve's one of the greatest coaches.
Well, I think you're right in that, and I think they're both made for each other. Steve Kerr is a guy he's not a system coach. I mean, he knows how he wants to play, and he tries to get players who fit that. but he's always open to suggestion. He's always open to hear what Steph has to say, or Draymond, or Klay Thompson in years gone by, and listens to them, takes their advice, and tries to implement it. And I think Steph is one of the most unique players ever. I think he's one of the best players ever to put on a uniform, and his place in NBA history can't be denied because he did help change the game. The game's different now. When the Warriors started shooting threes, everybody's going, "Oh man, why are you guys chucking up all those threes?" And now look what the Celtics do. They don't even want to take a two. The Warriors eventually evolved into a team because everybody was running them off the 3-point line to where Steve Kerr had to tell them it's okay, you can take a step in and take a two. And then with Kevin Durant, you gotta let him do his thing. He's deadly in the mid range. So they evolved a little bit over time. But the impact that Steph had on the game, now you see kids, and they're working on their handle, they're working on their shots. Some of their coaches are not happy that they're out there warming up with 3-point shots, but that you got to get them close to the basket. Even Steph starts right in front of the basket as he warms up. That's the first 3 or 4 shots he takes is all form right in front of the rim. And so Steve, I think, is underrated as a coach because he's had Steph. I think that goes with the territory. I mean. But he has done so many things, so many unique things, little things. You'll see the Warriors, the other teams on the free throw line. They take a first free throw shot. Warriors call timeout. Why? He doesn't want the other team to have time to set up their defense. Just a little thing. And then at the end of quarters, you always see Steve bang. The Warriors get the ball back. Curry gets off the bench. Final 20 seconds. Bang. They turn the ball over. Bang. Draymond comes off the bench for that final possession. He doesn't take any possessions off, and I think that's a real. I think a lot of coaches don't think that far ahead, and I think he at times can catch them napping that way.
Since the back-to-back 2017-2018 championship teams, this is going to be the 7th season in a row where we've had a new champion with the Thunder and the Pacers playing against each other in the finals. Raptors, Lakers, Bucks, Warriors, Nuggets, Celtics, and now Indiana or OKC. What's going on? Why is that happening? This will be the first time in history.
I think there's 2 things going on. One is the salary cap, the way the cap is set up, so it's hard to keep a great team together. Oklahoma City in a few years, they're going to face some really difficult decisions because they're going to have a lot of people who are coming out of their rookie contracts who are going to want to get paid and probably should get paid. So that's going to be tough. It's going to be really difficult for them to make those decisions. Boston has decisions to make. They're up against the cap. And then those aprons they've put in on the cap to try to keep teams from overspending, now I think are keeping teams from sustaining a long run of success. So I think this may be the norm in the future just because of the cap. And also I think teams are getting smarter. Back when Pat and I first started watching the NBA, the Cleveland Cavaliers traded away like 3 first-round picks in a row, and that's why they put in the rule that you can't do that anymore because Cleveland basically crippled themselves for about a decade because of that. And so I think the teams are a lot smarter now, and there's a lot more data. A player that looks good to the eyeballs may not pass the test of analytics, so I think teams are making better decisions.
Let's talk about the second apron. Obviously, my team, the Celtics, they're really up against it. They're probably, unfortunately, going to have to let go of Kristaps and Drew Holiday in the offseason. And, like we were discussing, all these new champions every year. Is the second apron, is it something that realistically anybody could go over? Or is it just does it decimate your future too much? And also, is this something that Adam Silver and company designed to do this specifically to keep the interest up and prevent more of things that happened with the Warriors where you have a long, sustained run of success?
Wow, everybody was tired of the Warriors winning? What's wrong with that? I think that is the penalties above the second apron are draconian. They are just, you lose draft picks, you lose any flexibility. You don't want to get there. Maybe if you think you've got say if the Warriors had we're back in 2018, 19, and there was a second apron, maybe you say, okay, we'll do this because we could think we can win a couple more titles with Kevin Durant, and Durant say would have stayed. Maybe a team like that would do it, but for most teams, it's too much of a penalty to pay, and so I think that it's designed for parity. The salary cap's brought in as parity. I mean, if you're a fan of about 8 different Major League Baseball teams this summer, you have no chance. You're not going to beat the Dodgers. You're not going to beat the Yankees unless something incredible happens. And so those fans go into the season going, okay, well, we'll root the team on, but we're not going to win anything. In the NBA, it's a little bit different. In the NBA, because of the cap, a team can say, hey, maybe we're not going to win it this year, but next year our younger players are older. We'll have some money to spend. We could really make a good team. I mean, and so Indiana is a good example of that. They made some great decisions and have kept their salary structure intact so that they can make this kind of run.
Each of these major sports leagues are structured differently. Obviously, like the MLB, you have your luxury tax. You don't have like a hard cap like you do in the NBA, NHL, NFL. NFL, you have your draft, and then like there's draft lotteries, there's the schedule release. There's so many different things that you can point at in terms of what all these leagues do differently. Do you feel like there's anything between NFL, MLB, and NHL that the NBA does better? And do you think there's something that the other leagues do better that the NBA could learn from and do better themselves?
I think the NBA. The only thing I think the NBA might do a little bit differently, and there's been some talk of it, is they might move the draft in the future. I've heard nothing official on this, but I know there's people talking about it. A lot of sports writers have talked about it around the league, and some general managers have mentioned it too, because I think they would rather have free agency before the draft.
Hmm.
So if you fill a need by a free agent, then maybe you don't have to fill that need in the draft. And so a lot of the other leagues do it that way. And so I think maybe move the draft back a couple of weeks and have a free agent period before that, and to see what happens. That might be one thing they can do better. But I'm telling you, the NBA is so great at the off season. I mean, it's just like it's like all of a sudden, it'll be a dead period. Oh, somebody traded for that guy? Really? It seems like the NBA almost has this controlled chaos every offseason that keeps their name up and in the news. I don't see as much of that with MLB, though I think they've done some good things, speeding the game up a little bit to try to make it more appealing to younger people. So I think all the leagues are looking a little bit better. The NHL, they have the NHL is a hard one to really judge because they have a geographical problem. They have a whole bunch of people. Wave again, but keep the help from coming in. They keep the help from coming in the room there. The NHL has a geographical problem because there are certain states where it's really not that big, but they've expanded successfully to places like Florida and Dallas, and so I think they've done a nice job with that. And as far as the NFL is king. They're the Teflon monster. Nothing happens in the NFL that has long-term ramifications. They just kind of slides off everybody and they just keep moving on, printing money.
That's a great answer. That's you gave a lot of really good insight there. I think you're right in terms of the free agency and the draft timing. I think I hadn't really thought about that, but that's a good point there. 3.5 hours up the road from Coach and I is Newport, Maine, the home of Cooper Flagg,
How
who's
about
probably going
that?
to go number one to the Dallas Mavericks. Now, they got let go of Luca, and he's on the Lakers all of a sudden. So there's a lot of speculation about it being rigged from fans. What do you say to those fans who look at what happened with LeBron going to Cleveland, and all the things that have occurred over the years with teams? Derrick Rose, getting number one pick at just the right time for their franchise to stay relevant. What do you think of that?
I think I think I don't think it's rigged, but I think if it is, the NBA is really smart at it. But because all those were great stories and all those helped franchises that needed help. But I don't think it's rigged all that much. I think certain teams have gotten lucky. The San Antonio Spurs are the luckiest franchise in all professional sports because they've had the number one pick 3 times, and that each time there's been a franchise-changing big man ready and waiting for them. hand delivered to them. Once they won the lottery, you don't even have to scout anymore because you know who your pick's going to be, right? And they've done that 3 times. But anyway, I don't think it's rigged, but I think that certain teams. Remember, Cleveland was in the lottery a lot back then, so they won the first pick a few times with Wiggins and Bennett and LeBron. So they were bad teams that were kind of hanging around waiting for the lucky gold bar to drop, and it did drop with LeBron. So, but again, the only solution to keeping teams from tanking, I think, is relegation, and I don't think we'll see that in the NBA.
Next, let's talk about NIL. So NIL, obviously, the athletes are now getting paid money in college, which I kind of think is a good thing because you don't want all these people making all this money and the athletes who actually generate this money are not able to access that. That seems unfair, but at the same time, like all these athletes who are, 18, 19, 20 years old getting paid millions and millions of dollars when they're still super young and they maybe haven't matured and haven't earned a ton yet, like, is that good? Like, so what's your perspective on NIL and how should it be managed? And also, how has it impacted the NBA?
It's impacted the NBA, I think, not really just yet, but I think it will because I think some players will stay in college longer. I think a lot of the guys that maybe the scouts and the coaches are telling him, yeah, you might be going in the second round. Well, they might stay in college longer to keep getting that money and maybe try to get their game a little bit better. I think that's where it's going to impact the NBA. As far as the colleges themselves, it's a course correction that's been needed for a long, long time. But I think it's also opened up Pandora's box. There's a real debate going on the West Coast because Oregon's big donor is the guy that runs Nike. Okay, so if he's giving money, and or donating money, Nike's a publicly held company. There's all kinds of ramifications there legally. So there's a lot of like really gray area in this I think it's gonna open colleges up to more litigation than they know what to do with. But it is good for the players. I think they deserve it. The colleges have been making millions and millions of dollars off the backs of these guys and girls, and so I think it is needed. But it's also going to take some schools right out of the running. I think you're going to see less of the Cinderella story in the NCAA tournament because if you're in a mid-major and you're their best player, hey, I can go be the seventh man at Michigan State and make twice as much money as I do here. And, that's hard to say no to. Kids have a hard time saying no to that, especially if they don't come for money. I think the fact that now you have NIL paired with the transfer portal, it's going to really cripple the schools that are strong in academics that are trying to play big time. Most of this we're talking about is football. Okay, so the schools like Stanford, Cal, Northwestern, Vanderbilt, they're going to be the ones out in the cold when all this is done. And so I think there's a lot of things that I think there's unintended consequences of this that we don't even know yet. And I think it's going to come back that way. The problem is that in say 4 years, 5 years, there's going to be a super football conference. And all the schools like UConn, UMass, Stanford, Cal, schools like that, schools that aren't playing, a championship level football, well, they're not going to be invited to the party. The SEC and the Big Ten doesn't want to share money. They have no interest in sharing money. And the other part about the NIL for the academic schools is nobody transfers to study harder. That's a cold, hard fact. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. And so, so there's a lot of things going on here all at the same time.
A lot of great info there. I'm somebody who's been paying a lot more and more attention to college football over the past few years. Part of it was my Patriots weren't as good as they used to be as they were growing up, and I like Michigan, and Michigan's been pretty good the past few years. So this Big Ten now, like you had Oregon leaving the Pac-12 for the Big Ten, and they're all kind of being shoved into one conference. And I don't want to ask too much about football, obviously, because your focus is on basketball, but like just from a basketball perspective, like What do you see happening to the smaller schools who aren't going to be able to have these athletes and kind of have these super conferences assembled potentially in basketball and fewer Cinderella stories like you mentioned this year as well in March Madness?
And especially if you're looking at the major football conferences where the championship contenders will be judged by their record. I'll give you an example. My son's been working for Sac State football out here, Cal State Sacramento, and they're a good program at the, we used to call it the 1AA level. Now it's what, the FCS or whatever it is.
Yep,
And so
FCS, that's right.
and so you know, their only way to recruit, I think, now is to tell a kid, come on in here, you're going to play, and we're going to coach you up, and then you can move on to your next destination. And the other problem that they have is that for schools like Sac State, UC Davis, maybe some of the smaller schools in the Northeast who are playing D1 football, they need that game. Sac State has to go play at Cal, at Stanford, at Washington, at Fresno State every year. They need the check. The check pays for golf. It pays small sports that don't produce a lot of revenue. That check that those small schools get from the big schools is very important to them. And if those schools stop scheduling the smaller schools, then the presidents of those small schools are going to look at football and say, wait a minute, we're losing money here. We pay a lot of money in insurance for football. We're not getting revenue in for football. Do we really need to have football? If nobody's paying attention to our program. And so for a lot of kids who play football at that level because they love it, at the D2, D3 level, they love playing football because they're not going to the NFL. That avenue will be shut, and it'll be shut down forever.
That's too bad to hear, but I think you're correct. I've done my fair share of research on that. I want to get into women's basketball a little bit, just touch on that briefly. Obviously, I think NIL, you have Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckers, all these big stars who are coming out of college now and really getting a lot of notoriety. And the WNBA has changed a lot in the last year. Just talk about that for a minute and the growth of women's sports and what the NIL has done for that.
Yeah, I think the NIL will help with the major women's sports. I think it's great that what we're seeing is happening at the basketball level is fantastic. It's overdue. They play a really strong fundamental game for the most part. Most of it's below the rim, so it's a different game from the NBA, and that's kind of cool. I think that gives it its own little distinction, and there's a lot of talent there. And there's a lot of talent overseas. The number one draft pick of the Valkyries is not going to play for them this year because she's still over in Europe playing there. And so that shows you that there is some really good talent overseas. In fact, the Valkyries are going to lose 5 of their players, I think, in the next month because they're going over to play Eurobasket, right? So they have to then bring in 5 other players. But the attention that the women's sport is giving, and Caitlin Clark has a lot to do with that. She has changed the narrative on women's basketball, and I think women's sports I think is in a place of ascension right now. I think it's really going to pay off in the long run because I think we're going to see that there's a lot of great athletic talent that maybe we ignored over the years and shouldn't have. And so I think it's going to open doors for young girls everywhere to have that dream that maybe I can be a pro, maybe I can play major college sports. And I think that dream's important. Goal setting is very important for young kids.
Awesome. I was glad to hear your answer for that. You also touched on like internationally. Internationally, the game's grown a lot, and now we're looking at more competitive Olympics, potentially the U.S. not being as dominant as they have been in the past. This might have been the last Olympics where, the United States wins it seemingly every year, and now we have had recently like Giannis, we had Jokic, we have SGA, all players who are not from the United States win the MVP. So talk about the growth of the game internationally and the implications of that, both bad and good.
David Stern, had told us years ago, the former commissioner of the NBA, that he's going to make basketball a global game. We all kind of looked around and says, okay, and he did. He brought the NBA to Europe, to Asia. One of the biggest hotbeds of basketball fandom is the Philippines. The now, it was a huge story when the Warriors signed Sharunas Marciulionis. He was like the second international player to sign the NBA, and it was a real big deal. And now it's nothing. Every team has a few international players, and you're right. The rest of the world has caught up to us. But there's also a flip side to that. What happened this year in hockey? Team USA played Team Canada and played them right down to the wire, right? Who would have ever thought that? When we were kids, if Team USA played Team Canada, they would have lost, probably 6-1. Lake Placid was the outlier. That was the one time it happened for them, and it was a great, unbelievable story. But so yeah, the rest of the world's caught up. In fact, if you look at Canada now, if they get all their players on the floor at the same time and get them playing in a cohesive way, they're a threat to win gold right away. They don't have, I think, the size that maybe the other teams would have, but they have the talent for sure. We know Serbia has a really good basketball program, and so France and Spain and all these great countries that have done incredible things. Even one of our assistant coaches is the head coach of the team from the Bahamas, and they went down and beat Argentina last year in Argentina, and that's huge for an island country like that. So the game's grown; it's great. I think worldwide, I think it's second in popularity to soccer. Maybe F1 might be in that ballpark worldwide, but definitely it's a game where everywhere. People know the NBA, they enjoy the NBA, whether it be China. And here's the next gold mine for basketball. It is the continent of Africa. And there's an African Pro League. The NBA has started there, and they're starting to, as their coaches get better, as there's more opportunities for players to play, you're going to see more guys like Dikembe Mutombo come to the NBA and have great careers. That's the next gold mine of pro basketball.
With all this talent coming in, obviously the NBA is at 30 teams right now. NHL has recently expanded to 32. I've read some articles about the possibility of going from 30 to 32 in the NBA, just like NHL, maybe Vegas and Seattle, those teams. Do you think that's going to happen? And also, with all this new talent coming in, do you think the G League, kind of the minor leagues of the NBA, could grow to a point where it's kind of similar to what the Major League Baseball minor league system is like, where every town has a farm team?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see basketball Class A, Double A, Triple A type model. They are, every team has, I believe every team now has a G League team, and that's what they wanted to get to. And I think that's would be the goal, and I think that would be the goal if they bring in two new cities. Personally, I'd rather see them go to Seattle and Vancouver. I think Vancouver got a raw deal. Plus, I like going to Vancouver more than I like going to Vegas. But I think Vegas is the market everybody's in love with for some reason, and so I think they'll be going. If they do expand, I think the rumors of Las Vegas and Seattle make sense, and then one team in the West would have to go east, and my guess would be it would either be Memphis or Minnesota. That would make the most geographical sense.
I heard Brian Windhorst was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and he said it was Minnesota, Memphis, who you had listed, and I want to say the Pelicans were also thrown in there as a loose possibility.
Right, because like for New Orleans and Memphis, their shortest flights are to eastern cities. The Warriors had to play Memphis in the playoffs, and a couple of times. I'm telling you, that's a long flight from the West Coast. It takes a long time to get there, and they're only an hour flight away from Charlotte. But it's like a 4-hour flight to play a West Coast rival. So yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. For Minnesota, it would make sense because then they'd have two natural rivals really close in Milwaukee and Chicago. So both teams would really make sense. So let's throw Vancouver in there and move two teams to the east, and we'll be all set. So.
I wouldn't mind seeing Vancouver get an NBA team. I think that'd be pretty cool. So I heard there might be a war between those three teams. Just real quick, while I was thinking of it, Windhorst was also mentioning there's going to be a war potentially between those three teams to get east, to be the one to get east. But he's saying something that could get rid of that war would be if it was just a straight 1 through 16 seeding model after the play-in for the playoffs and no more conferences. Do you think that's going to happen? Because I kind of doubt it, but I wanted to hear your thoughts.
I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think it makes numerical sense, I think because, let's face it, there was a year the Warriors won 48 games and didn't make the playoffs. We lost in the last we lost two of our last three games, I believe, and got beat out by a game by Denver. Or no, we were tied with Denver and they had the tiebreaker, I believe. And so, but if they were playing in the Eastern Conference, they would have been a 6 seed. So I think that's where it would make sense. It would keep the parity. The problem is if you do that 1 through 16 and now, if 16 is Miami and number 1 is Portland, that's your first round matchup. Portland and Miami, 6-hour flights each way. I don't know if that would work too well in terms of geography. The other cool thing about it is that by playing west on west, east on east, you really develop rivalries. All right, the Knicks playing the Celtics, they play them 4 times a year anyway, right? And so there's something built in there. The Warriors have rivalries with certain teams. Houston for sure. They hate us down there because we never lose to them. We have a rivalry with Memphis over the years because of what's gone on down there between the two teams. Rivalry with the Clippers. That was the first team that really got the Warriors' attention. That was the first team they had to get past to get to a championship level. So I think keeping it west on west, east on east develops more regional rivalries, and I think that's really good for the game.
Circling back now to kind of like your involvement with the Warriors and just kind of your experience there, I'm curious, like, what are your favorite moments, maybe some funny stories, favorite games, stuff like that in your career working with the Warriors people would find interesting?
Well, the first favorite moment has to be when we won in 2015, and the reason is that I felt that the young fans of the Warriors, the championship team of '75 belonged to their dad or their granddad. That was their team. Now they had their own team to celebrate, and it was also a reward for the loyalty of that fan base. I mean, even when the Warriors were bad, we still drew. We still had good crowds, and being a Warrior announcer means that on 99% of my home games, I don't have to worry about energy. The energy's going to be in the building. And so that makes my job a lot easier. And so that would be a favorite moment. I think the going to the playoffs in 2007 at Oracle and having that place be so insane, just a wall of noise, and upsetting Dallas, just an incredible story that, it would be like a Disney movie. Well, it couldn't be a Disney movie. We had Baron Davis, Steven Jackson. That couldn't be a Disney movie, but I think but I will say this about that team, flying with that team with Nelly as our head coach and with all those guys, all those great characters we had on that squad, that's as close as I've been to being on a real live pirate ship that I'll ever be on. So that was a real group of characters that we had there. But no, those are kind of the favorite moments. And just the other thing, broadcasting my first NBA game as a Sacramento Kings announcer back in 1989, and realizing that all the buses I rode, all the minor league games I did, all the the different sports I've done. I've had such a lucky career. I've done hockey at Division I level. I've done football at the D1 level for Stanford. I've done Major League Baseball. I've done Canadian football, which was a little odd to turn, but it was fun. All these things that I've done in my career. And, and that to me, getting that first big time play-by-play game under my belt, that was a career milestone. That's what I've been working for all those years. And then when I came to the Warriors and signed with them in '95, it was because I wanted the chance to do some college football, to try to do Major League Baseball, to try to push myself a little bit. And it's worked out fabulously, better than I could have ever dreamed of. And so really the moments it for me with the Warriors, the championship moments, the getting to the playoffs, and just being around so many great people, people that, the people I've worked with, I've loved each and every one of them. They're just great people. Our engineers and our producer and my color commentators, there hasn't been a bad guy in the bunch.
That's fantastic.
I'll jump in for a second, Drew.
Yeah,
I've been enjoying listening to you guys, but Tim, talking about that '07 team, I know you get a lot of pub in the Bay Area for the Elevation Sensation thing. They keep going back to that on talk radio all the time. But my all-time favorite memory of any of your calls was the Baron Davis dunk on Andrei Kirilenko
Oh yeah,
in the
my
playoffs that
goodness.
year. And you could just hear in the call the explosion of the fans on that. That was just a savage play and kind of an iconic thing. But I can tell you as a relative, turning on ESPN and looking at highlights and hearing them use your call is a source of great pride for me. I enjoy so much when I hear your voice. I run to the next room and I grab Nancy. Tim's on TV.
Well,
but
it's better.
I just wanted to share that. Do you have a favorite call?
The Baron dunks up there. The final seconds of the championship. In 2015, that's a favorite call, and Draymond's block at the end of Game 5 in Toronto in 2019. The game Kevin Durant had gotten hurt. He had just gotten back, got hurt, and it was just everything was against the Warriors, and Draymond comes out of nowhere. And Kyle Lowry's in the corner. He takes his three, and Draymond just got a fingertip on it. You could just see the spin of the ball change just a little bit, and you knew he had just got it, and it forced it to hit the side of the backboard. And we got one more game at Oracle, and that to me was great because I was able to convey the emotion, but also get the play spot on, and I was really happy with that one. By the way, Drew, he's talking about being proud here, and I can tell you, we're as a family, we're more proud of maybe some of our family accomplishments than when we tried to be a yacht rock band back in the 1980s. If you see that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
You gotta lose that photo too.
I just wanted to make sure that Drew knew you had hair at one point, so so you didn't come out of the womb like
the
this.
The thing about that picture, Drew, that was my brother Mike's wedding.
Yes,
I think I was 18, Tim was 17, and you see me on the end there. My hands are in my pockets, not because I have an attitude, but because I had to give up my suspenders to my brother's father-in-law because the touch
I
they
didn't know that
didn't fit.
I didn't
so I was
know
walking around the whole wedding reception trying to hold my pants up. But little family history there.
Yeah, okay.
God, lose that photo, Tim, will you?
You could email that to me before you lose it. That'd be something I'd enjoy having. Anyway, one of the last things I wanted to ask was just in general, when we have people on for these interviews, I ask about advice. I think we talked about 3 years ago, right before the NBA playoffs started, and that was actually right when I started this channel. And you gave me some pieces of advice in terms of just like how to go about it and connecting the social media, and I've taken that, and I think it's paid off pretty good. But for some of our younger viewers out there, I just would be curious to hear your thoughts and advice on trying to make it towards NBA or broadcasting, YouTube, whatever people have their goals at.
I just remembered one thing about you mentioned about moments. The other moment was in Boston when Steph had 43 in Game 4. That was unbelievable performance. He was not going to let the team lose. And a funny story about that is I asked Kenny Atkinson the following year. I said, "What were your feelings? Down 2-1 in Boston." He goes, "I was terrified." He was our assistant coach at the time. Now the head coach of the Cavaliers, great guy. And he goes, "I was terrified." We went into the meeting and I'm pacing back and forth. He goes, "I can't sit down because I'm nervous." And I look over and there's Steph, Draymond, and Clay, and Steve Kerr all relaxed, going, "Yeah, okay, we'll do this. We'll take care of that, and then we won't let them do this." And they were all calm and went out there and just just did a great job. But that to me was great because that was Steph's game, and that's where Steph, I think, anybody who didn't believe Steph, was Steph, had to believe after that. He just put the team on his back that night. So I was very happy for him. And of course, he eventually won the MVP. Now, advice for young people who want to get into pro sports. I would say, you have to, as much as it pains me to say, you have to be good at social media, because that can get you your foot in the door and can help with whatever projects you have. The one thing, the moms get very happy when I tell their sons or daughters that you have to be well read. And by that, I mean you have to read books and read magazines and read stuff on the internet. But I think the book thing is important. I'll tell you why. Because, you pick up books and don't just read about the stuff you love, which I think you should do anyway. But occasionally pick up a book that you don't know anything about. Okay. And read that and see if that triggers something. I've had calls in the past where I've turned a phrase or used a word or an action, and I'm be driving home. Where did that come from? And eventually it'll come. Oh yeah, I read a book about the conquistadors at some point, or about ancient Rome, or whatever it was. And so that can help you in your job, and I think it helps you striking up conversations with players and coaches. If you're interested in some of their activities, and more about what gets them going, then I think it allows you to do your job better. So be well read, know social media and the atmosphere where you're going, know what the team expects of you. If you want to be a broadcaster, then broadcast. The only way you get better is through repetition. And Pat can attest for this. I spent years. And in fact, when I was in college, I got hired at age 19 as a backup minor league hockey announcer. Okay. So the bus driver took pity on me. And after the team unloaded after a road game, he'd drive me to my dorm, drop me off, and I would literally go in, shower, grab a cup of coffee, and head to class. And so I did that for 2 years. And so that's when when you're doing working at a level that's low and you still love it and you still look forward to it every day, that's when you love it. And I think that's what, if you can, do high school games like you were doing, do whatever it is, public address. I did public address in high school for a men's baseball league, and that at least got me thinking about how to use my voice, how to use a microphone. And unfortunately, I was official scorer. That was not always fun. But I just think you get out there and do it. Find a minor league team, find a high school team, a college team, and just get out there and do it and tape yourself, listen back to yourself. You're your own worst critic. And I think if you do that over time, you'll find out whether or not you really love what you're doing. And then, there's a lot of great jobs in sports that don't have you wearing a headset. There are cameramen that I know who work Warrior games who on the side, they do Giants games, or they do college football, or they work. One of them works Notre Dame football every week, and he'll fly out, and he's part of that crew. I know cameramen and producers and directors who've worked World Series and Super Bowls and things like that because they're good doing other things. So if announcing is not your thing, there's a million ways to get into the pro sports world. You just have to find one that's going to be a long-term deal and one where you can make enough to live on.
Fantastic. Appreciate your time very much. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. I'll come back on next year if you want. And
that'd be great. Love to have you back.
Ridicule my brother some more.
You can only come back if there's no more photos. We don't need any
more photos. Yeah, stack of them over here. But no,
seriously, thanks a million, Tim.
No, it's my pleasure. I had fun. This was fun.
Please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps out a bunch and is completely free. Thank you.